Hello out there. Thank you guys so much for joining another episode of the Leaders Unfiltered podcast. We are kicking it off with Art Zeile of DICE. Super happy to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a distinct episode from the ones that we have done in the past. Typically, we're interviewing folks in procurement, and we have the opportunity to interview you today. DICE.com, for those that have been in the staffing and recruitment sector, you guys know all about this. Give the audience a little bit of background on yourself, and of course, DHI and DICE.com.
I really appreciate that, Angela, and thanks for having me on the show. I came on board to DHI Group in 2018. DHI Group consists of DICE, which we're going to be talking about today, as well as ClearanceJobs, and they are two platforms for recruiters to essentially find technology professionals in the United States. Only difference between the two is that for ClearanceJobs, we focus on folks that have a government clearance. I would say in the broader scope of my career, I've largely been an entrepreneur. I started off in the Air Force, and I was an officer in the Space and Missile Systems Center. And so once I departed, I actually went to work for a small boutique software company. I was a team leader, led a team of about 7 developers in San Francisco. And as a result of that experience, because it was a small company, I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur myself. And I started a video conferencing services company in 2003. And I sold that to a very large telecommunications company, Global Crossings. They asked me to start an office for them in London. That led to my second business, which was a data center business, one of the very first data center businesses in the United States in 2009. And I successfully sold that business, started a third business in cloud computing. Wow. And when I was done with that business, I was kind of courted by the right folks on the board to join DHI Group. So my career has mostly been very entrepreneurial. And so I know that we're going to be discussing a little bit about that over the course of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you so much for your service. I'm sure that foundation definitely helped lift you off into becoming the person and the entrepreneur that you are. And it's cool to see, through the course of your career trajectory, how you were kind of at the pioneer, the onset of many different movements that we've seen happen since the 2000s lifted off. And for those, I know that we have a lot of folks that listen into our show that are all about the workforce ecosystem. Many of them have been suppliers and vendors within the space. Some of them are actually servicing larger programs. Be that as it may, DICE.com and ClearanceJobs.com has definitely been a company that I've recognized since I stepped into staffing and recruiting over 10 years ago. So I'm really excited to not only pick your brain about your career, but also about, this company and the formation of these companies to be where it is today. But with that in mind, I would love to know what's been some of the biggest lessons in your career in navigating these shifts, the highs and lows in tech, because you started in telecom and then you went into data centers and then, kind of shifted into cloud. And of course, now with DHI, talk to us about some of those lessons.
I think that it has been very fortunate that I've been part of the tech and tech services industry my entire career for the most part. And there have been highs and lows and a lot of lessons learned. I'd say one of the biggest lessons learned is how important the overall economy and demand environment is. I was an entrepreneur, like I described, and started this data center company in 2008. We obviously had to go through, I said 2008, but it was actually incorrect, 1998.
Okay, gotcha.
So if you recall that period of time, that was a time when everybody was focused on internet-based business models. And we were the fortunate beneficiary of that until we weren't. What I mean by that is that that was the age of the dot-com bubble. And in 2001, a lot of companies just faded away. Their business models were not the right business model for that period of time. And so we saw a huge decrease in demand. A lot of our competition just went out of business. There were a lot of data centers that were just vacant in 2001. And so one of the most important lessons learned, I think, is to be very conscious of the demand environment, of recessionary pressures. That would be another major lesson learned, is that 2008, we saw the Great Recession. We had to be very cautious about expenses in that time. And so much of an entrepreneur's, I'd say, ability to survive really comes down to managing expectations around revenue and revenue growth versus expenses, because
Yeah.
survival comes down to whether or not you have enough money in the bank to survive a tough period of time. And
Wow.
this has been a tough period of time in terms of tech hiring for the last 2 years. So I know that we're probably going to spend some time talking about that as well.
Yeah, no, well, that is a perfect bridge. But as somebody that is soaking up as much wisdom as I can from you, it really came down to being able to navigate economic uncertainty with demand and how to apply that to your OpEx. I'm so happy to be able to get into those lessons in this episode. But you mentioned something that I want to double down on, and that has been the last 2 years within the tech industry. And maybe we can paint a broader stroke around this, really through the onset of 2020, right? How that shifted hiring trends, but more so what this uncertainty has really looked like in a challenging time for the industry when it comes to layoffs. And you don't have to be, in the news to just know that there's been major corporations that have been making layoffs. And obviously the picture that's painted right now is maybe even more uncertainty on some of the indexes and what they're signaling. But what are your suggestions on the last 2 years and evolving post downturn, right? Hopefully we can look at this as a rebound. And I'd love to just know, what has that looked like for you guys, and what do you think that's going to head towards?
All great questions. And I'm going to paint a big picture because I think the last 2 years are super important. But the bigger context is that probably the last normal year for tech hiring was 2019. Think about the fact that that is now 6 years ago. So
Can I
2019
pause you
was
for a
a year.
second? What would you define as normal hiring?
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so I've studied 2019 a lot as a result of just making that statement.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that a normal year would be the United States GDP is growing at its historical rate of growth, which is right around 2.5%. And because of turnover in the tech economy or the tech workforce, that means about 300,000 new tech job postings per month.
Gotcha.
So that's an important benchmark, because when you have that velocity of new tech job postings, then there are a lot of staffing firms that are happy. There are a lot of
Yes.
recruiting firms that are happy. There are a lot of recruiters that are busy.
Mhm.
So it's been different since then. So obviously we went into 2020, we had COVID. COVID taught us that a lot of businesses weren't digital enough. You couldn't order whatever they were delivering online. And what do you need to do that? You need technology workers.
Right.
It also taught us that a lot of businesses weren't ready for work from home environment. What do you need for that? You need technology workers. So in 2022, specifically coming out of COVID, there was this burst of activity around hiring technology workers, pent up demand. And we saw in 1 month, specifically the month of May of 2022, a need for 650,000 new tech workers. So
Goodness.
twice what is
Wow.
considered to be normal in 2019.
Yeah.
But then the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates, and people believed that a recession was possible. And so as we closed out 2022, actually the number of new tech job postings started to fall precipitously. We had companies, as you mentioned, like Meta, like Google, like Amazon, like Salesforce, very big visible names, start to have layoffs. I mean, Meta itself did 2 layoffs that essentially deleted 25% of their workforce. And so that also became part of the conversation around the technology workforce. So we dipped down through the course of time to about December of 2023, where we saw 140,000 new tech job postings. That is the lowest number we've seen probably in the history that they've been charting tech job postings. Now we're on a slow and steady recovery. Why is that happening? Well, I think that it follows a long-term trend. If you looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and charted the number of people in the tech workforce, you'd see that it was up and to the right. It's one of the 2 main demographic trends associated with the workforce that have been persistent for like the last 30 years. There's always been more and more tech workers in the United States, and there's been more and more healthcare workers. So those are the 2 major trends that have been very consistent. So we're starting to see a rebound. Now, there has still been a question as to whether or not we go into recession, so people are still very cautious. But then the other kind of countervailing trend is the importance of AI. People know that AI is a real thing. It's going to actually really change the nature of America, the nature of how we, pursue our business models. And you need technology workers to implement AI. And so, as one example of a data point that I think is very indicative that we are seeing an expansion of tech worker demand, on our site, DICE, at the beginning of last year, so 2024, we had about 9% of our jobs requiring AI skills. At the end of the year, it was over 30%. So
Wow.
a third of our job postings required AI skills. And we look at AI skills as a taxonomy of about 15 different specific skills. So it's not just AI. AI resolves to machine learning engineering. It resolves to data science. It resolves to a whole bunch of different skills.
Wow, that is a pretty crazy ride that we have been on the last
Yeah, we
year. But
really
I
have.
love how you're
It's
ending it
amazing.
with this semblance of optimism, not just because where we're seeing, even though on a slower upturn is there and it's happening, but also because of what the inevitable truths will lie ahead of us with AI and with some of these other trends that we see happening within the tech space. And I want to just revert back to one of the statements that you made earlier in your career. And I think you said you were you were an entrepreneur to one of the first companies that was a data center, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Doubling down on data and macro trends, right? Well, how do you think macro trends are going to be shaping the future of tech hiring and workforce planning? What are some macro trends that you are looking at, especially with this trajectory that you've had over data and how to store it, how to save it, but even from the longer term macro trend lens? What do you think is some of those trends that are shaping the future of tech hiring? I know you just talked about a few of them with AI, of course,
Yes.
but what are your thoughts on that?
I still think that there are three major trends that are very relevant to the tech workforce. Cloud computing continues to be in high demand.
Yes.
Now, that might sound like an old school idea, but still, there are a lot of people that are managing applications in data centers and they haven't moved to the cloud. So, we still see an elevated need for cloud engineers and people to understand how to apply AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two would be this idea that artificial intelligence in all of its forms are going to essentially transform business models in America. They're going to make certain business models obsolete, certain business models, brand new business models that will explode. And that will actually also affect the data center universe. Right now, there is a wave of growth activity associated with data centers to support these large language models. The third trend that I think is a really super big one for the tech workforce is cybersecurity. There's no question that it becomes more sophisticated. The attacks, the hacking vectors, the different playbooks that are being enacted by nation states as well as hacking groups become more sophisticated over time. And that just means a demand for more sophistication on defense. And in fact, one of the main trends that we've always charted over the last 6 years at DHI Group and across DICE and ClearanceJobs is this huge gulf in the supply of cybersecurity professionals in the United States and the demand for cybersecurity professionals, meaning we just don't have enough and we don't train enough. We don't create enough in the United States. So those are three major trends that I think everybody should have in their view, but AI is the one that's most explosive in my opinion. And I could tell you a couple of data points that I think are very indicative of this that I think everybody should be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of my career, when there's been a big, kind of tectonic shift to something that's new, like the internet or data centers or cloud computing or mobile computing. It's usually the largest enterprises in the United States that can be the early adopters. And the way that they become early adopters is that they go to the larger consultants like IBM or McKinsey or Accenture or Deloitte, and they say, what do I do with this? Like, how do I adopt this for my business model? And so IBM had their fourth quarter earnings call a couple of months ago, and they indicated that they had already booked $5 billion worth of
Goodness.
AI project business.
Wow.
$2 billion in the fourth quarter alone. So it's accelerating. The other data point that really would tell you that this is real is if you go to the career sites for McKinsey, for Accenture, for Deloitte, for IBM, you will see that they are hiring armies of AI engineers because they believe in it. So once the larger enterprises can essentially create the use cases that work for them, that trickles down to the medium-sized businesses and then finally to the small businesses.
I love how you painted the picture of that macro trend and AI shifting through cloud-based storage and technology, and then really ended with the cybersecurity. We're a part of the Inspire group amongst many different chapters, and as somebody that is not entrenched in technology, there was a session that I attended that talked about cybersecurity and best practices, and it's in a room full of CIOs, right? So top of mind, kind of what keeps you up at night. And I was just taken aback by how sophisticated hackers are in certain countries. Their life, their full-time role, and droves of departments, hundreds and thousands of people dedicate their career to hacking. And in some areas, it's government backed, right? So, I mean, it is out there, it is real, just as much as the AI trend is happening, really doubling down on best practices within cybersecurity. And I am not sure how much, the general population is aware of how sophisticated the cybersecurity threat has grown, evolved, and is very present in our everyday life.
Totally agree. I always say that the difficulty of cybersecurity is that defense really means that you have to make sure that every single member of your team understands their responsibilities.
Yeah.
As one example,
Yeah.
there are phishing attacks that are taking place continuously in this environment where an individual member of our team will receive an email message saying, click this link. So we have 380 people in our company. All it takes is one person to make a mistake and the hacker gets into the system, and now you have to have a different level of response.
Wow. That is the best line of defense, without a doubt, is your team. Okay, so I wanted to go into a different direction and World Economic Forum. I'm not sure if you saw their Future of Jobs report that came out earlier this year. It's
Yes.
talking about the 5 to 10-year trend that we're seeing at a macro level in terms of what jobs are going to evolve, what jobs may become obsolete. Of course, with the AI trend, a lot of these clerical, administrative, monotonous tasks are probably going to be replaced in some near future with AI and automation. But what was very clear and present within that report was that there is simply a skill shortage. And you noted it a couple of times in terms of demand for AI, demand for cybersecurity, demand for these macro trends, these very macro trends that you've cited. But it is a very clear, and present force within this report to say the pace in which technology is evolving, we're not keeping up with it. Or as we would say in Texas, we ain't keeping up with it, right? Like we're not keeping up with that pace. So what is the response to that? And they've talked about upskilling and reskilling, and that is going to be a surviving factor between this lineage between the humans that are going to be keeping up with the pace of technology. And what I thought was pretty cool is, you guys have really kind of been pioneers in the skills-based hiring approach. And we've seen this kind of as a trend happening within the last 5 to 10 years, but you guys have really doubled down in terms of skills-based hiring and understanding a candidate much more beyond their resume. And I think right now is a very pivotal time for us to really start talking about that. Can you give us a deeper look into how you guys have looked at and assessed skills?
Yes. In fact, I'll give you even better than that. I'll give you the psychology by which we actually believe it's really important to double down on skills assessments and skills-based view of a person's experience. It's really interesting, but if you talk to anybody that's in the technology industry, they really don't talk about their title. And the reason for that is pretty clear. It's because a lot of people have the title of junior software engineer or senior software engineer or staff software engineer, but there's no real boundaries between those titles. So if you looked at a person that is maybe 20 or 25 years in their career, you might see that their title for the last 15 to 20 years was senior software engineer, and that's it. So the title doesn't tell you anything. And if you looked at a job posting for a technology worker in the United States, you'd find that they're asking for like 20 to 30 or more specific skills that are required for that job because every company has their own tech stack that they have to work within. And you'd also find that most technology professionals would have a skills block inside of the resume. So it's all about skills all the time. And it's super important to understand that, from a tech perspective, individual skill has a half-life, in my opinion, of about 5 years. Maybe it's even less in this environment. I came out of the Air Force programming in Fortran. but you would never find a requirement for a Fortran programmer on the DICE platform at this point in time. So again, it's all about skills and making sure that you're relevant for the next set of skills that are going to be necessary. And I do think that those skills that are associated with those macro trends of AI, of cloud engineering, of cybersecurity are the most important for technology workers in the United States today, or technology workers across the world for that matter.
Wow, that is an incredible philosophy to have. And I think that that is taking what has been the traditional approach in job searching and really elevating it for a future forward trajectory. And I love that. I would love to know about DICE since your leadership and since you've come on board as CEO. Talk to us about how it's evolved, and maybe this is a moment for a slight pat on the back for yourself, but since you've come on board, what has been some of the leadership and just the general growth for DICE?
So I appreciate you asking that question. I would say that it is very interesting to think about the time scale of DICE. DICE has been around for 34 years, so for a third of a century. And it was created by two developers who actually started their career in Des Moines, Iowa. They moved to San Francisco, where they created DICE as a BBS, a bulletin board system. And then they converted it to a website on the internet. Then they moved back to Des Moines. And that's the reason why we have a large number of our people still to this day in Des Moines.
Yeah.
I would say that there was a period of time, probably a decade before I showed up, where the belief was that DICE as a profile database was good enough. So there wasn't a lot of innovation. In fact, there wasn't a major release prior to me showing up in 2018 for probably like 5 to 7 years. And so a lot of what I did over the course of the last 5 to 6 years has been to really create a new culture of innovation. We have a major release every single quarter. We have minor releases that are taking place hundreds of times per year. So that's happening in the background. A user doesn't really experience that other than they see that there are new filters or new features or new things that they could take advantage of. I'd say over the last 5 years, we've emerged from being a profile database to much more robust communication system. When you think about what it takes to hire a technology professional in the United States, it's not about posting a job. I would say posting a job is the equivalent of putting a billboard in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa and hoping the right person just happens to be walking or driving by. Most technology professionals, because the unemployment rate is so low, it's like around 2%, are not looking for a job. So you have to engage them. So our job on DICE has been, in many respects, a matter of putting together features that allow for engagement between recruiters and technology professionals and high engagement. So we have our own messaging system. We have our own private email system that's embedded in the platform. We've done a ton of things. I think one of the most important and kind of revolutionary things that we've done is we've been approached by customers that have said, okay, you guys are the acknowledged experts in hiring technology professionals. And I can buy a subscription to DICE, but can you help me more? I'm a manufacturing company and I need to find a data scientist, and I'm used to finding manufacturing workers. I don't even know what a data scientist looks like.
Wow.
So can you recruit a data scientist for me? And so we put together a talent solutions division that is now extended beyond our software platform to having recruiters for specialty kind of like assignments that are being given to us by our clients. And I'm really proud of the fact that our DICE leadership has basically said, we want to provide more than just software as a service. We want to provide a continuum of services that meet the needs of the individual clients at where they are with regard to their level of sophistication.
Yeah, it definitely is that natural, it's almost like this organic transgression of being able to provide that consultative oversight and understanding and navigating the complexities of tech hiring. And that is super cool to be a part of and to see and witness. What about the future? If you had this crystal ball in front of you and you're looking at 2 years, 3 years, especially with what you mentioned in the philosophy with skills-based hiring, how would you like that future to continue to evolve for DICE?
I think that the future for DICE, because of the level of activity associated with AI, is becoming the acknowledged expert in all of the myriad dimensions of AI.
Wow.
Like you mentioned that there are going to be certain positions, certain occupations that are going to be diminished over the course of time. I honestly believe that. And AI is going to splinter into 1,000 different types of skill sets or agents that are required to essentially deliver a business model, whether or not you're in manufacturing, whether you're in telecommunications, whether you're in any manner of the economy. So I'd like us to become the acknowledged experts in how to attract and retain AI talent, because I think it's that important for the future of the United States economy.
It absolutely is. And that is a significantly exciting milestone to speak on, and definitely feel like you guys are going to be leading the way and being that hub of AI talent, and the continuum across all spectrums on how to find it, how to deliver it, how to reskill for it, and how to even, provide that type of labor in an industry where it's definitely something new. And it is uncharted territory. It's kind of the Wild West right now, but it is a hefty goal to have, and wishing you guys definitely the best. All right, so now it's time for us to understand Art, the entrepreneur, the mindset, the lessons learned, the good, and hopefully the bad we can talk about, because I love really learning through the challenges of the entrepreneurial mindset. And you have been, I think the term is serial entrepreneur, and you've certainly been a serial entrepreneur. What does the entrepreneurial mindset mean for you? And I just want to say, I am asking this question selfishly, and I think a lot of folks are going to garner a lot of benefit in listening to you. But what does that mindset truly mean to you?
In my opinion, what it really means is to be your customer. And what I mean by that is that all of my entrepreneurial businesses that I've started from my own basement were associated with solving problems that I had experienced myself. So I told you that I started a video conferencing services company in 1993. The reason why I did that is that while I was in the Air Force, we implemented video conferencing at Los Angeles Air Force Base. We were one of the very first Air Force organizations to implement video conferencing. And it worked great when we were video conferencing from one location to another. But when we tried to mix multiple locations into the same meeting, it actually failed about 80% of the time. And if you think about that, 80% of the time, that's pretty rough. In fact, the general that was in charge of the program complained to me saying, "Why is it failing, Lieutenant?" And so I had to figure out a solution to that. That became the genesis of my very first video conferencing business, connecting people into what was called at that time multi-point meetings. So I experienced that pain point myself before I built the business. Then I sold that business, as I told you, to Global Crossings. They asked me to start an office for them in London when I was in my late 20s. The office was a data center that was built right in the heart of London. And they said, "Well, that's great, but where's your plan B? What happens if the Irish Republican Army bombs London? What are you going to do then?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'll have a secondary data center." And so I went and found that there was a company called Telehouse that would rent me part of their data center. That became my idea, because I experienced that problem, to bring back what's called co-location to the United States. And then when I was building the data center company, we essentially built 21 data centers in the United States. A lot of our customers kept on saying, "Well, we need help transitioning to this thing called the cloud." And so I said, "Well, let's build a business around that idea of helping you manage cloud." So it was always about managing new technologies, I'd say, but it was also being a customer or feeling the pain of your customer. I think that's the most important part of being an entrepreneur, is that if you feel your customer's pain, then you're empathetic, and you also have the opportunity to essentially ideate around how to solve the problem. Now, what does that mean for us today? I constantly use DICE. I constantly use ClearanceJobs. I constantly secret shopper all of our competitors like Indeed and ZipRecruiter and obviously LinkedIn. Right. So I am trying to figure out how I can solve more pain for our customers all the time. I think that is the most important thing and mindset you could have when you're an entrepreneur. I think there is an interesting side story that I'll tell you, because you asked, the good, bad, and ugly. Yeah. I think the other important part about being an entrepreneur, because you have to have an authentic relationship and people have to have trust in you, and they're taking a big bet on a small company. Mm-hmm. You have to be truthful through and through with them. So when we started our video conferencing company, one of our very first customers was the largest video conferencing consumer at that time, which was JP Morgan, the bank. And we facilitated a meeting between JP Morgan's New York City office and a dozen other offices that was a speech by General Colin Powell. And it was a disaster. It did not work out at all.
No way.
And the CTO of JP Morgan gives me a call and says, well, what happened? And I said to him, well, quite literally, we had the wiring inside of our equipment done wrong and we didn't double check it before the meeting. So it was our fault. At that time, because the technology was so new and the networks that were being used were so fragile, we could have blamed it on a number of different things. We could have just created somebody to blame for the meeting going wrong. The CTO literally called me back the next day and he said, you know what? I'm going to double my business with you because you're the first vendor that has told me the truth.
Wow.
And so to me, again, being an entrepreneur means being in a small business format. There's somebody that's taking a risk by purchasing from you. You have to be authentic. You have to tell the truth 100% of the time, even if it's painful.
I love that so much. There is something so special, I would say even sacred, about owning it,
Yes,
owning it.
totally agree.
Yes.
You have to
fully.
own it, and you have to, there's going to be mistakes in all of life. There's always mistakes, and there's always lessons learned and dips in the road.
Yeah. Okay, so for the entrepreneur that's listening in, myself potentially, what advice about being the entrepreneur would you give for navigating the wins and the setbacks? You've given us a good example, especially of a setback. It included a little company called JP Morgan. But, what advice would you give? You've talked about authenticity, you leading with integrity, you lead with that relational, but for the psyche of the highs and the lows and trying to maintain that composure, any advice?
Yes. My number one leadership rule is be positive.
Wow.
And the reason for that is that there are always going to be bumps in the road. There is going to be high points. There's going to be low points. There's going to be mistakes, like I said. And through it all, the best thing you could do is show positivity to your team and create a culture of positivity because, it's hard work. In many cases, when you're an entrepreneur, you're not working a 40-hour work week. You're working a 60, 80-hour work week. And there's got to be something that is positive every day. The other thing that I say, and it's related to positivity, is figure out a way to thank a person every single day. Thank them for what they did because that creates a virtuous cycle of positivity. Everybody is thankful for each other, hopefully.
Wow. That is super powerful. And it's one thing to be positive during the wins, but it's also another thing to maintain that during the lows, during the moments of, you got to show up with resiliency and being that leader that everyone needs to see in those difficult times. Okay, so Art, I am so sad to say, but we're wrapping up today's episode and we're going to end it with a chat GPT generated question in the spirit of AI. And as I'm reading through this question, I sometimes find a little jealousy because they're so good at these questions. So here, Art, is your chat GPT question of our podcast. It says, you've seen the tech industry ride incredible highs and brutal lows. You got to love the adjectives that it's using. What's the one hard truth about the tech sector that no one wants to admit, but every single leader needs to face?
So that is actually a really good question. And like you said, I think that ChatGPT did a great job. The tech profession is different than a lot of other professions. If you're a doctor, and let's say you're a urologist, you learned what you need for the large part back in med school and through the course of your studies many, many years ago. And that is good enough. In the tech sector, what you learned last year is not good enough. And nobody likes to talk about that. And people kind of understand on a theoretical basis that they need to keep their, sharpen the saw or make sure that they're constantly learning. But it moves so fast. And I think over the course of my lifetime, it's getting faster, like it is accelerating. So whatever you think you've mastered last year is clearly not good enough for next year. I'd say that is the brutal truth of the technology industry.
I love that. It almost should be like the university college course credit should be all about resiliency and the continuum of learning because that's
love of learning.
Love it. Okay, awesome. Well, this is going to wrap up our show with you today. And wow, it's been a fantastic episode. And I really want to thank you for just spending some time with us on the Leaders Unfiltered podcast. I felt like this was truly unfiltered dialogue that a lot of our listeners are going to soak up and take with them, myself included. So we certainly want to give you a big shout out and a big thanks for just spending some time with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Angela. Really appreciate it. Great questions.
Yes, absolutely. And a thank you to our listeners for tuning in to today's episode. It is not lost on us on how valuable time is. So we want to thank you guys for spending some time with us. We will catch you guys on the next episode of Leaders Unfiltered.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.